The wind in the high chaparral is a lonely sound, a constant whisper through brittle sage and sun-scorched rock. It's the only voice Alara Hayes has for company most days, and it speaks of dust and endurance. Today, it carries something else, a tremor of wrongness. She stands from her small patch of stubborn corn, hand shielding her eyes against the brassy glare of the afternoon sun, and sees the buzzards circling low over the dry creek bed that marks the edge of her property. It's not the patient, high-altitude wheeling of birds waiting on a slow death. This is an urgent, greedy vortex. Something is down there, something fresh. She grabs the old Spencer carbine from its hooks inside her sodden timber cabin, not out of aggression, but as a necessary extension of her own arm in this unforgiving land. The creek is a scar of cracked earth and bleached stones, but a dark stain mars the pale dirt near a cluster of jagged rocks. As she gets closer, the stain resolves into a man, face down, a terrible stillness about him. His buckskin leggings and bare back mark him instantly, Apache, and protruding from the knotted muscle of his shoulder is the feathered shaft of an arrow. Her breath catches. This is a danger far greater than a starved coyote or a cornered rattlesnake. Helping him could be a death sentence. Ignoring him feels like a betrayal of something deep within herself. Then she sees the fletching on the arrow. It's not Apache. The goose feathers are cut crude and straight, bound with dirty twine. It's a settler's arrow, shot from a cheap bow. This was not a battle between warriors. It was an ambush. He groans, a low guttural sound of pure agony, and the choice is torn from her. He is not a threat. He is a dying man. And with a decision that feels like stepping off a cliff in the dark, she lays down her rifle and kneels in the dust beside him. They faced harsh judgment, but someone saw their true value. Before this story unfolds, tell us, have you ever stood up for someone unfairly judged? If you believe in looking beyond the surface, hit like and subscribe. The man was heavier than he looked, a dead weight of muscle and bone. Alara was not a large woman, but her life of hauling water, tilling hard soil, and chopping wood had woven a wiry strength into her frame. She looped her arms under his, ignoring the slick warmth of his blood, and began the agonizing process of dragging him back toward her cabin. Every scrape of his body over the stony ground was a trial. The sun beat down, turning the air in her lungs to fire. He was unconscious for most of it, his head lolling, but twice he came to, his dark eyes clouded with pain and fever, a low growl rumbling in his chest. She just kept pulling, her own voice a hoarse, repetitive whisper. Almost there. Just hold on. Almost there. Her cabin was little more than a single room dug into the side of a low hill, the front wall made of scavenged timber and sod bricks. It was sparse, but it was clean, and it was hers. She maneuvered him onto her own narrow cot, the only piece of soft furniture she owned. The effort left her trembling, her dress stained with his blood. For a long moment, she stood over him, her heart hammering against her ribs. The silence of the room was deafening. The man on her bed was the embodiment of every cautionary tale she'd ever heard. The boogeyman used to frighten children and justify hatred in the nearby town of Redemption Gulch. His black hair was matted with dust and sweat, his skin the color of rich earth, and his features, even slack with pain, were sharp and severe. He was the enemy. But as she looked at the ugly, weeping wound, the crudely made arrow still lodged deep in his shoulder, she saw none of that. She saw only a man, brought low by a coward's shot. Taking a deep breath, she went to the hearth, stoked the embers, and put a kettle of water on to boil. Her hands, usually so steady when setting a rabbit snare or mending a seam, trembled as she laid out her meager medical supplies. A bottle of whiskey, clean rags, a sharp skinning knife, and the needle and gut thread she used for stitching leather. This was different. This was a life. The next few days blurred into a grueling cycle of fear and focus. The man, she didn't know his name, of course, drifted in and out of a raging fever. He thrashed and spoke in a language that was all harsh consonants and soft vowels, words that sounded like the land itself, like rock and river and wind. Alara forced water and thin broth between his cracked lips, bathed his burning skin with cool cloths, and cleaned the wound with a meticulous care that bordered on reverence. The hardest part had been removing the arrow. It had taken all her strength to break off the shaft, and then pushed the barbed head through the other side. He had screamed, a raw, animal sound that clawed at the inside of her cabin and seemed to echo for miles across the empty plains. She had gritted her teeth, tears of empathy streaming down her face, and finished the job, stitching the torn flesh with neat, practiced movements. Each creak of the floorboards, each gust of wind rattling the shutters, sent a spike of adrenaline through her. She was hiding a fugitive, an Apache warrior, from a world that would see him hanged and her along with him. When she had to make the half-day ride into Redemption Gulch for flour and salt, the fear was a physical weight in her chest. The town was a dusty street lined with false-fronted buildings, populated by faces hardened by suspicion. The gazes of the other women in the mercantile slid over her and away, their disapproval a palpable thing. She was an outsider, a woman living alone on a worthless patch of dirt, a thing to be pitied and scorned in equal measure. The town's unofficial patriarch, Silas Croft, was the source of much of that scorn. He was a man who had gotten rich by means of a sharp mind and a blunt conscience. His sprawling ranch bordered her small homestead, and he made no secret of his desire to absorb her land into his own. He'd seen her ride in, his cold blue eyes tracking her from the porch of the saloon. "Still trying to scratch a living out of that rock pile, Mrs. Hayes?" he'd called, his voice carrying an easy, condescending authority. "It's my rock pile, Mr. Croft," she'd replied, not looking at him, her hands tightening on her saddle horn. "A stubborn woman needs a strong man to guide her. My offer to buy you out still stands." A charitable offer, considering. She had just shaken her head and urged her tired horse onward, feeling his gaze on her back like a brand. That encounter made the ride home feel twice as long, the parcel of supplies a damning piece of evidence. What if someone followed her? What if they saw the smoke from her chimney and grew curious? She lived in a state of constant, nerve-shredding vigilance. Her world shrunk to the four walls of her cabin and the life-and-death struggle happening on her cot. On the fourth day, the fever broke. She found him awake, his eyes clear and startlingly alert. They stared at each other across the small room. The air was thick with a tension that had nothing to do with fever and everything to do with the chasm between their two worlds. He was weak, but the warrior was present in his gaze, watchful, assessing, utterly unreadable. She held out a bowl of broth, her hand steady now. "Drink," she said softly. He watched her for a long moment, his eyes moving from the bowl to her face. Slowly, painstakingly, he pushed himself up with his good arm. He took the bowl, his fingers brushing hers. The touch was brief, electric. He drank, his throat working. He finished the broth and handed the bowl back, his gaze never leaving hers. There was no thank you, not in a language she could understand, but she saw it in the slight softening of his jaw, in the way his eyes held a flicker of something other than pain or suspicion. It was the beginning of a truce. The silence in the cabin changed after that. It was no longer the empty silence of solitude, but a shared quiet, freighted with unspoken questions. He healed with a speed that astonished her. The innate toughness of a body honed by a hard life asserted itself. He began to move around the small cabin, his gait still stiff, but with a fluid grace returning to his limbs. He watched everything she did, from kneading bread to oiling her rifle. He observed the way she moved, the economy of her actions, the weariness that settled in her shoulders at the end of the day. Likewise, she watched him. She saw the way his hands, when idle, would trace patterns in the air, or how he would sit by the window for hours, not looking out at the land but seeming to listen to it. He never spoke, and she didn't press him. Words seemed inadequate, clumsy. Their communication became a language of gesture and intuition. When the water bucket was low, he would nod toward it. When she brought in firewood, he would take it from her with his good arm and stack it neatly by the hearth. One afternoon, a rider approached the cabin. Alara's heart leaped into her throat. It was one of Croft's men, a surly cowboy named Jeb. The Apache, whose name she still didn't know, moved with a sudden, silent swiftness, melting into the darkest corner of the cabin behind a hanging blanket before she could even think to warn him. "Ma'am," Jeb said, touching the brim of his hat without dismounting. His eyes roved over her small homestead with open disdain. "Mr. Croft sent me. He's worried about you, out here all alone. Heard tell of Apache raiding parties north of here." I've seen no one, Alara said, her voice tight. She stood in the doorway, blocking his view of the interior. Well, you keep a sharp eye. A lone woman, it ain't safe. Mr. Croft says again, you'd be a lot safer in town. He'd give you a fair price. I'm fine right where I am, she said, her chin lifting. Jeb shrugged, his gaze lingering on her for a moment too long before he wheeled his horse around and rode off. Alara leaned against the doorframe, her legs weak with relief. When she turned, the Apache was standing right behind her, his expression grim. He had heard. He understood the pretense of the visit. He knew the man was not offering protection, but delivering a threat. He looked at her, then at her small, threadbare cabin, the meager garden, the patched dress she wore. He saw the truth of her life. She was as trapped by her poverty and her gender as he was by his wound. The days that followed were woven with a new kind of thread. A fragile trust began to sprout in the barren soil of their shared isolation. He started to speak, a few words of English at first, guttural and heavily accented, likely picked up from soldiers or traders. Water, more, good, simple words for a simple existence. He pointed to himself one evening as they ate a stew of rabbit and wild onions. Kale, he said. Alara, she replied, touching her own chest. It felt like a monumental exchange. Naming each other was an acknowledgement, a bridge across the void. Kale's strength returned fully. He began to help with the chores, his movements efficient and powerful. He showed her a better way to set her snares, a way to read the weather and the clouds, how to find water by following the flight of certain birds. He was teaching her how to survive in the very land she'd been fighting against for years. In return, she taught him more words, pointing to objects and naming them. Spoon, fire, blanket, they were like two children inventing a language. The threat of Silas Croft, however, never faded. It was a low hum of anxiety beneath the surface of their quiet life. Twice more, his men rode the perimeter of her land, their presence a calculated form of intimidation. Alara knew it was only a matter of time before Croft's patience ran out. She lived on borrowed time, and her secret guest was the hourglass. One night, a week after Jeb's visit, Kale sat by the fire, his face illuminated by the flickering flames. He had been quiet all evening, a deep, contemplative stillness about him. Alara was mending a tear in his buckskin leggings, the needle moving in and out of the soft leather. She felt his eyes on her. When she looked up, he was holding a small, rolled-up piece of hide, cured to the color of pale buckskin. It was something he'd kept tucked away in his belongings. He unrolled it carefully on the floor between them. In the firelight, she could see intricate markings drawn in what looked like charcoal and some kind of red ochre. It was a map, but not like any map she had ever seen. It was a picture, a story. There were mountains drawn like jagged teeth, a river that coiled like a serpent, and symbols she didn't recognize, a crescent moon, a stylized eagle, a star with 7 points. Kale pointed to the wound on his shoulder, now a puckered, healing scar. Then he pointed to her. His meaning was clear. You did this. You saved me. His finger then moved to the map, tracing a path from the Serpent River into the heart of the jagged mountains. He stopped at a symbol that looked like a cave entrance marked with the 7-pointed star. He looked up at her, his dark eyes intense, and spoke the clearest English she had yet heard from him. For you, he said, his voice a low rumble. He pointed to the symbol again. My people long ago. Nde Shin, he struggled for the word. White stone shines in the dark. Alara stared at the map, her mind struggling to comprehend. White stone that shines. It could only mean one thing. Silver. He was giving her a map to a silver mine. A sacred place, by the reverence in his tone. A gift of unimaginable value, given in payment for a life. The hide felt heavy in her hands, weighted not just with its own material, but with the promise of wealth and the certainty of danger. This map could free her from Silas Croft, from this life of endless toil. Or it could be the thing that finally destroyed her. Kale watched her, his face impassive, but she could see the question in his eyes. He had paid his debt. What she did now was her choice. The knowledge of the map changed the air in the cabin. It was a silent, powerful third occupant. Alara tucked it away safely, but she couldn't forget it. The promise of it was a constant, seductive whisper. Freedom. Safety. A life where she didn't have to count every penny, where she wouldn't be at the mercy of men like Croft. But Cale's gift was also a burden. He was now healed enough to travel. By rights, he should leave, return to his people. His debt was paid. Yet he stayed. Neither of them spoke of it, but they both knew why. He had given her the key to a treasure, and in doing so, had also painted a target on her back. He would not leave her to face the consequences alone. Their fragile peace was shattered a few days later. It was dusk, the sky bleeding purple and orange over the hills. Alara was outside, pulling the last of the carrots from her garden, when she heard the horses. Not one rider, but several, and they were coming fast. Cale emerged from the cabin in an instant, a knife appearing in his hand, as if from nowhere. He pulled her behind him, his body a shield. Silas Croft reined in his horse just yards from the cabin, flanked by Jeb and 3 other hard-faced men. His gaze flickered from Alara to Cale, and a slow, ugly smile spread across his face. It was a smile of triumph. Well, Mrs. Hayes," Croft said, his voice dripping with false cordiality. "Looks like your rat problem is bigger than I thought." He spat on the ground. "Harboring a savage. That's a hanging offense in this territory. For both of you." "He was hurt," Alara said, her voice shaking but defiant. "I helped him. It's got nothing to do with you." "Everything on this land has to do with me," Croft sneered. "I was willing to be neighborly. I was willing to pay you for this worthless dirt. But now I think I'll just take it." His eyes, small and greedy, narrowed. "Jeb found something near the creek the other day. An Apache bead. Got me thinking. An Apache wouldn't be this far south alone unless he was lost, or unless he was looking for something. Something his people left behind." Alara's blood ran cold. He didn't know. He couldn't. But the raw avarice in his face told her he suspected. He was a man who could smell gold, or silver, through a foot of solid rock. "Burn it," Croft commanded his men, gesturing to her small cabin. "Burn it all. We'll see what's left in the ashes." Jeb dismounted, a torch already in his hand. But before he could take a step, Cale moved. He was not the quiet patient anymore. He was a warrior. He flowed forward, a blur of motion, silent as a panther. He didn't attack Jeb directly. Instead, he kicked the man's feet out from under him and in the same movement, snatched the Spencer carbine that Alara had left leaning against the cabin wall. He spun, levering around into the chamber with a sound that was like the crack of doom in the evening stillness. He didn't aim at any of the men. He aimed at the torch Jeb had dropped, which now lay sputtering in the dry grass. The rifle cracked, and the head of the torch exploded in a shower of sparks and flaming pitch. It was a masterful, impossible shot, a clear demonstration of lethal skill. Croft's men froze, their bravado evaporating in the face of such deadly competence. "Get off my land, Silas," Alara said, her voice ringing with a strength she didn't know she possessed. She stepped out from behind Cale, standing beside him. They stood together, the lone woman and the Apache warrior, a united front against the encroaching darkness. Croft's face was purple with rage. His hand hovered over the pistol at his hip. "You think one savage and a beat-up rifle can stop me?" "No," Cale said, his voice low and steady. He had never spoken so many words to her, let alone to an enemy. "Not just rifle." He held his knife up, its blade catching the last light of the setting sun. "Your men are ranch hands. They fight for pay. I fight for honor. She gave me back my life. This land is hers, and it is protected." The conviction in his voice, the utter lack of fear in his stance, was more potent than any bullet. He was offering not a threat, but a statement of fact. To get to her, they would have to go through him, and it was clear that would be a bloody, costly affair. Croft looked at his men. He saw the doubt in their eyes. They were bullies and thugs, not soldiers. They weren't willing to die for his greed. His fury curdled into frustrated hate. He glared at Alara, his eyes promising retribution. "This isn't over, you." He couldn't even find a word foul enough. With a savage curse, he wrenched his horse's head around and spurred it back toward his ranch, his men scrambling to follow, leaving a cloud of dust and humiliation in their wake. The sound of their hoofbeats faded, replaced by the chirping of crickets and the whisper of the wind. The silence that fell was profound, a space cleared of violence and hate. The immediate danger had passed. Alara looked at Cale, whose eyes were still fixed on the horizon where Croft had disappeared. The rifle was still held at the ready, his body tense. Slowly, He relaxed, lowering the weapon. He turned to look at her, his dark eyes searching her face in the gathering twilight. The air between them hummed with everything that had just happened, with everything that had remained unsaid for weeks. He had called it her land. He had said it was protected. He had made her fight his own. He offered the carbine back to her, but first, as she took it, her fingers brushed his, and this time, neither of them pulled away. They stood there for a long moment, the warmth of the rifle stock passing between their hands, the two of them alone under a vast, star-dusted sky. The cabin, her meager home, was still standing behind them, safe. He looked from her face toward the dark silhouette of the mountains, the same jagged peaks drawn on the hide map. Then he looked back at her, and a small, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his mouth. In that shared gaze, a new map was drawn, not of silver or stone, but of a future. It was a future that was theirs to claim, together, on this small patch of land they had both defended, a place that was, finally, home. Thanks for watching. If you believe in compassion, overcoming prejudice, and finding love in unexpected places, give this story a like and subscribe for more. They found their justice and happiness. What part of their journey against prejudice touched you the most? Let us know below.